And tonight on PM Express, a conversation about Ghana's ability to receive the next tranche of money to be given to it by the IMF. Of course, I'm sure you followed the press conference that the IMF actually addressed and said that we're doing well. We're looking forward to getting an additional 600 million and also subsequent installments of this loan in 2024 all through to 2026. You must have also followed the IMF's review of Ghana's performance so far, and by now you must also know that Ghana's ability to receive the rest of the tranches hinges on a successful external debt restructuring, particularly with big bilateral creditors like Ghana and the Paris Club. Tonight, we'll focus on why it has been difficult for Ghana to get its creditors, especially China, to move from the assurance stage to the approval stage, with Ghana owing the superpower China nearly $2 billion, including a substantial 619 million collateralized debt. Now, how do we fast track this process? Government is optimistic it will be able to receive the second tranche end of this year, but credit rating agencies, including Fitch, think it's only possible in the second quarter of next year. What's our reality? Let me share a few statistics with you. Maybe we would get the answer to our question. So this is the debt. I mean, the total debt is $52.3 billion dollars, and then 29.4 billion to external. That's the external component, and then 22.4 billion for domestic component. You also have followed the news of the domestic debt restructuring, which has given us almost 10 billion, which is, let's say, almost half of the 22.4 billion. Where we are right now is how to get our external creditors to also restructure. And of course, that is where the contention has been. And so we know that as we speak, we are at the level where we've been given assurance. We need to move from assurance stage to the next stage, which is approval. Are we there yet? Why are we delaying? So this is it. If you look at the domestic debt exchange, this is how it's been. And in August, the IMF published an article, and it's actually described our status. It says that our round one of the domestic debt exchange program is complete. Now, round two is incomplete. And you may recall that, I mean, recently, those pension bondholders and other bondholders were asked to come back for another round of restructuring, and there were some fuss about it. So that is still incomplete. Now there's the round three bit, which is also another restructuring that they have rejected. So if you look at that, it's been pending. And so the question now is, will there be more rounds? Listening to the IMF and also looking at the article they published in August, will there be more rounds? In fact, the IMF suggests that there would be more rounds of domestic debt exchange programs. Now look at the external debt restructuring. The first one, which is the assurance from all these bilateral, multilateral, the commercial creditors, all of them giving you the assurance. So that is complete. The next one is to get to the agreement stage. That is pending. And then the actual restructuring, that also is pending. And this is how it looks like. And the reason people are saying China may be the missing piece, China alone, we owe China alone 1.9 billion. That is aside the collateralized debt that we have. Now, this is also Paris Club, which also has $2 billion. So you look at this, and the moment China leaves, it means that all of this will be coming at us, because all these people, the others who have, we owe $3.8 billion, the multilateral component, which is $8.8 billion, and the Eurobond, which is $13.4 billion. All of these people are just silent, looking at what China will do, then they take a cue from China. Remember, all of them do not have any collateral agreement with Ghana except China, who we owe 1.9 billion. Will China still be the determining factor? It is something we want to know and we'll be getting to know. According to the IMF in August, that article I talked about, the IMF said regarding official bilateral debt, the next step is for the official creditor committee for Ghana under the G20 common framework to reach an agreement with authorities, that is Ghana, on the specific modalities of how official creditors intend to deliver debt relief consistent with fund program parameters. Ghana is also engaging with their private creditors to seek relief on their external debt. Again, the question is, are we seeking the relief on the interest or the principal? These are some of the questions we'll be asking and also try to get answers. So these are the interest payment servicing in 2023. For domestic, we're paying this amount, $2 billion, and then external, $3 billion. So it's like if they agree, they could decide to just let all these go. If the external debtors agree, they could just allow you to pay instead of $3 billion, pay $1 billion, or decide to take it off at all. But we're saying, is it the interest we're going to be asking for the creditors to give us a relief, or the principal? We'll be looking at that. So in all, this is Ghana's balance of payment financing gap between 2023 to 2026. And you look at the gap, it's 15.05 billion. The support we're getting from IMF is 3 billion. It's just 3 billion we're getting from the IMF. The World Bank is also supporting us with the 1.55 billion. If you take this and add to the 3 billion, you'll be left with a balance of 10.5 billion. Question again remains, how do we get this 10.5 billion? Where are we getting it from to deal with this challenge? So tonight, there are a lot of questions that we need answers to, and we'll be trying to get those answers tonight. And we're asking, why the delay? My guest tonight, Professor Bokwin. Right, so before I introduce to you my guest, this is what the Ghana's mission chief, Stefan Rode, said this week. He said, just like we got the financing assurance before Ghana secured the IMF program, this financing agreement from the external creditors is needed before the IMF board approves the first program review. All right? So he says that we got the assurance first from the external creditors, and that is why we had the first tranche of 600 billion. Now, we need an agreement. We need to move from assurance to agreement. Then we can get the next tranche and the subsequent ones. Where are we with this external debt restructuring? Tonight, we ask, why the delay? My guest tonight, Professor Godfred Bokwin. He's an economist and professor of finance at the University of Ghana Business School. Kojo Ponkroma will also be joining us. He's information minister and member of the Finance Committee of Parliament. John Abdullahi Jinapo, who's also a member of the Finance Committee of Parliament and MP for Yape Kosogo, will be joining us. Dr. Richard Etuahine is a banking consultant. He would also be joining this conversation. Let's have a conversation after this break. Welcome back to PM Express, and I'm grateful, gentlemen, for your time this evening. And PM Express is brought to you, kind courtesy, Syntex Tank. It is strong, it is tough. Alomo beaters experience greatness in every moment. And the Ghana AIDS Commission, they are supporting this program. So Syntex Tank says, no matter your water needs, Syntex Tank has it all. Syntex Tank is first to introduce double layer tank, and now you can have as many layers as you want. Syntex Tank is first to introduce white inner layer tanks in Ghana. We now introduce to you, the customer specs, order, which lets you order any color and size of preference. Syntex tank gives you the longest warranty of 7 years, which no other tank gives you in Ghana. So whatever your water consumption, size of project or demand, choose Syntex tank. We have agents nationwide. You can call Syntex on 0244 335 168 or shop online at syntexgh.com. Syntex tank, a strong, a tough. Let me begin with you, Dr. Etuahene. And we know that, right, I'm told Dr. Etuahene is not available. I'll then shift to you, Professor Bokpin. We know that our external debt component it's made of different components. And like I mentioned in my introduction, the commercial, the bilateral, the multilateral, and the others. So from our bilateral creditors, Mr. Bokpin, is it realistic that Ghana can get the go-ahead by end of this year from these creditors? I want to use Zambia as a yardstick. And just before I came into the studio, I read an article that was published by Bloomberg saying that Zambia's external debt restructuring is now imminent. And I know Zambia started its restructuring since 2021. If this story is anything to go by, what then is special about Ghana to think that we can get this done by end of this year?
Right. Thank you very much. I think certainly if you look at in scope, the financing role of external debt relief then is very significant. As you rightly pointed out during the introductory stage, if you look at the financing gap in balance of payment terms, we are looking at something close to $11 billion. Annually, that translates to about $3.5 billion in terms of external debt relief. And that's quite significant, right? Now, if you look at the program design, you realize that without the external debt relief, the program can only achieve limited effectiveness. And that is how important this is. Now, if you look at the way the G20 Common Framework works, it's tied to an IMF-supported program, largely, right? And therefore, the understanding is that the success of the IMF-supported program itself is also contingent on how the external or debt restructuring goes. So far, I will say that from the domestic end, government has made significant progress. In fact, if you look at the outlook now, it's coming across to me that government probably should be closing the chapter when it comes to domestic debt restructuring, given the participation rate and all of that. I think we can make progress now. But what then is important is actually the external debt, to the extent that in closing the financing gap, the external debt relief is fundamental. It was even a pro-action because after staff level agreement was reached in December 2022, December 12, the delay in obtaining the financing assurance in itself was the reason why we didn't get the program approval on time until when we obtained financing assurance, I think May 13, and eventually the program was approved on May 17. So that is where we are. Now, the total external debt, everything is not up for restructuring. We know that the multilateral component, approximately $8.8 billion of that is actually not up for restructuring, both what we owe to the IMF and the World Bank and other multilateral institutions. Then it brings us to the external bilateral and then external commercial. So external bilateral is what the Official Creditor Committee is presiding over, co-chaired by China and France, right? And then you also have the external commercial. Now you will see that because of the comparable debt treatment among creditor type, then there's the need to ensure that whatever, or to a large extent, whatever that is agreed by the official creditor committee also provides inputs as to the level of the restructuring of the external commercial. That is where this whole thing, that is how it's going to play out. Now, already we can see some benefit from taking advantage of the G20 common framework, because government taking advantage of the debt service suspension clause, the fact that we haven't paid the coupon on our external debt so far, we have been able to accumulate some dollars, which has also helped us in shoring up our reserves and also offering some stability to the currency. But yes, given that we need to conclude the external debt restructuring in order to limit the uncertainty coming from that side, the focus now is a bit more on finishing the external debt restructuring. But we need to also situate this within a certain context. If you look at the whole essence of the G20 common framework, it was more to get China on board, right? It was more to get China on board. The fine details and the methodologies and timelines with which we work with the G20 framework hasn't actually been ironed out and documented, right? So it appears that there's a lot of learnings that has to be done and all of that. Remember that when it comes to debt restructuring and the rest of them, it may be a new terrain also for China, and then also how they integrate within the traditional Western framework of debt restructuring and all of that is a bit something that has to be carefully, we have to navigate that carefully. We've seen the delays with Zambia and all of that, and it has been one of the major concerns about the G20 common framework, that it imposes undue delay, and whether IMF could then consider lending into arrears, which probably allowed these countries to have breathing space and continue with, because really you can't hold life back that way and all that. So these are issues that I believe that this current joint IMF World Bank meeting in Morocco would prioritize in before they are done. Probably there will be a bit more clarity, because when they gather for this kind of meetings, all the parties are available. The meetings probably can move a little faster. We saw again how it worked out in the case of Ghana during the spring meeting in Washington. Okay, and therefore I want to believe that, and already you remember the tweet from the IMF managing director that she's quite hopeful that Ghana will be able to scale the wall and get the next tranche of the IMF supported program probably by the end of this year and all of that. Remember, Ghana has been a poster boy of the IMF for a very long time.
True.
And there's often the idea that the IMF treats Ghana with kids' growth. And I'm sure Honorable Kojo Oppong-Nkrumah will be happy about that, right? Because they have not stretched Ghana as much as they would have for other countries. I don't know, some way, somehow Ghana sells, right? But again, also, we also need to situate this within the context of the global geopolitics and then geoeconomic fragmentation and all of that, right? Because you see that perhaps the West, the traditional Paris Club creditors who prefer probably debt cancellation or something, but that probably may not sit well with China. We need to also understand China, right? They've been a big player on the continent, and therefore we need to properly recognize China. And I think at some stage, you get the impression that we are not really appreciating and recognizing China on the table that much, as though we could just order them about here and there or something. But we should also bear in mind that in the new, if you look at the global geopolitics and geoeconomic fragmentation, and vis-a-vis the policy China has also used in getting Africa to its side, more through debt and trade diplomacy, you could see that the more the West pushes for debt cancellation, it may be interpreted to mean trying to win Africa from China, so we could go back to our traditional West and the rest of them. Because remember that the word bond and bonds, the word bonds and bondage are from the same family word. Is that okay? So just as Bible says that just as a servant is a slave to the master, so is a borrower, a servant to the lender, one way or the other. So in all these dynamics, I think we need to appreciate the global geopolitics and then the geoeconomic fragmentation playing out in the midst of all of this also. And that, for which reason we need to understand where China is coming from. Because whether we like it or not, you see, the China's kind of lending is not like the West. Okay.
True.
For their lending, largely there's underlying infrastructure.
Yeah.
Okay. And therefore, once there's underlying infrastructure, there's underlying cash flow, it's very difficult to push forward the argument that I'm not in a position to pay. And all of that. So we need to look at it within context. But I also think that if you look at Ghana, we probably are majoring on the minor. Because if you look at our indebtedness to China, it's not that significant to hold us back, really. Because $1.9 billion in the scheme of things of our total external debt should not be the reason why people should suffer unnecessarily. And I think that the West and the IMF should take another look. Otherwise, they may be weaponizing this whole debt relief arrangement in a way that inures more to their benefit within the global geopolitics and geoeconomic fragmentation rather than the countries they are seeking to help. I think that is quite important. And to that extent, we need to understand where China is coming from.
Okay, and thankfully, I'm happy Kojo Nkrumah is joining us from that meeting in Morocco. I'll bring you in, Mr. Kojo Nkrumah, to tell us what exactly has improved or what new is coming at this meeting. But I'll bring you in, Dr. Echuahene. I just want to find out from the commercial creditors' point of view, why haven't we been able to actually progress with the external restructuring? Hello, Doc. All right, so we seem to be having a problem with Dr. Echuahene's line. We'll try and fix it and bring him back. But then let me bring you in, Kojo Nkrumah. So you heard what Professor Bokpin said, and he pointed out some areas that we shouldn't lose sight of. But first, government is actually optimistic it will get the buy-in of these creditors by end of this year to actually go for the next tranche and then the subsequent ones. But credit rating agencies, including Fitch, says that this will only be possible in the second quarter of next year. I mean, how do you intend to achieve this?
So for the next tranche, if you look at the, may I say, the contract or the agreement for the program, the next tranche is dependent on passing the first review. And if you look at the KPIs that were set for us, we have passed that first review, and that's the reason for which we've signed the SLA with the technical staff. And that SLA is now going to the executive board of the fund, and we're expecting that before the end of November, the executive board will give the approval so that the disbursement of that second tranche happens. But assurances were provided by our external creditors for the program, looking at the landing zone that we needed to may I say, landing and bring our debt from the high levels of around 100% to the levels that we had agreed upon. And our external creditors provided financing assurances that they will work with us to achieve that. So now what we have to do is to achieve agreement with them. But I don't think that if you look at the fine print, that agreement is a condition precedent for accessing the next tranche. Now, on the agreement, just like Professor Bokpin mentioned, this is a new terrain for the entire world. This framework that is being used to now look at, debt restructuring is essentially a new one. And all of us, the lenders and the borrowers, are prodding in the dark and are feeling our way. And that's why there are no hard timelines that have been established anywhere. So when you start to talk about delays, I think we have to re-examine the question of delays because there are no hard timelines. So it will be difficult to say there's a delay if there are no hard timelines. But what we've done is that we've separated our external creditors into two categories. The official credit committee, that is made up mostly of bilaterals, and that is jointly chaired by France and China. Traditionally, it was France and the Paris Club, but because China has become such a dominant lender on the global scene, and because China is also not very used to the old ways of dealing with debt defaults, etc., this official credit committee is a good embrace that brings together China and the traditional lenders. They are on one side. We are finishing the data validation with them, and then hopefully we will get an idea. We have an idea of the contours of the kind of agreement we want to reach with them, but we are finishing the data validation with them, and then hopefully they and their principals back home in their various countries can come to some acceptance level to give us an approval before we head for an MOU with the bilateral guys under the OCC. And then you have our bondholders in various categories. And they as well, we have made an offer to them. And we've actually heard from some of their subcategories. And the feedback both on the bondholder side and on the OCC side is pretty encouraging. That is what gives us the optimism that before the end of this year, we should have reached, and please listen to my words carefully so that we are not misquoted, before the end of this year, we would have reached a certain point of understanding with the official creditors and the Eurobond holders. It doesn't mean that we're going to get an agreement properly so-called with them before the end of this year. But that in itself is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing because A, we've already done the domestic. We think that we've been pretty successful with the domestic. And B, we are making progress with the external. And as these various rounds of negotiation go on and you find approvals being given by some of the key blocks, it gives a signaling effect to the fund that we are getting close to the agreement that we are looking for. And therefore, the fund is comfortable that the assurances that we're given are being followed. So it's not a hard timeline. No, it's not that if we don't finish this before December, the program is in despair or whatever. But no, we are not relenting. And we are pretty optimistic that the kind of feedback that we are getting from the external creditors, we will be on track as we brought together. I think for us, the critical thing is whether we are performing in accordance with the program KPIs. It's early days yet, and our problems are a lot. But for the criteria that was agreed between the fund and us for this first review, if I just may go over that criteria, the 6 quantitative performing criteria, the 3 indicative targets, and the 3 structural benchmarks, I think that we are pleased that we have been able to stick to it. Remember, there have been times when Ghana has had programs and we've been slipping on some of the key performance indicators. So we are pleased that we are starting off well. But it's too early for us to start applauding ourselves that all is kosher. There's a lot more work that needs to be done to stay on track. And the real headwinds, in my honest view, are yet to come. So we're on track now, but we have a lot more work to do.
On Friday, I heard the IMF boss, Georgieva, actually saying that Ghana has done well with our domestic debt restructuring, which Professor Bokmin also alluded to. But I want to read this from the Ghana Mission Chief, Stefan Rode. He said, just like we got the financing assurance before Ghana secured the IMF program, this financing agreement from the external creditors is needed before the IMF board approved the first program review.
Not our understanding that the hard MOU, and by the hard MOU, because it's not like all these countries are going to sign one document.
Okay.
I mean, if you think about the concept, it's not like all of these countries and all these categories of bondholders are going to even sign one document. But what you are going to get is that, like I mentioned, you're going to get levels of progress, levels of agreement with the key blocks. If you go into the official credit committee, and like Professor Bokmin was saying, you can talk about China, but if you look at China as a percentage of the entire 29 billion bucket, it's a different ballgame. If you come to the Eurobond holders or the bond holders, you're talking about something around 13 billion. So it's not as though they are all coming together to sign one document. You need some level of understanding and progress with them. that is what they are looking at. And if you look at the hard text of the ECF that we signed, the disbursement of the second tranche is based on the executive board approval, and the executive board approval is based on the SLA. And so we believe we're on track towards that. But I think, like I said, for me, the real big deal, the elephant in the room, is not so much getting a hard agreement in the next 2-3 weeks. It is about how we ensure that the economy back home is resilient and steady, despite the initial successes. Growth is doing better than we had programmed. There are critics who say that we shouldn't be too excited about that. I agree. We've got to look at some other aspects of growth that are job dense. If you look at what the government is doing now, putting together the growth component of the 2024 plan, we're targeting that. So there's a lot of internal work that needs to be done. And I think that that's where our real attention and effort ought to be.
Okay, but there's another question that, all of us have been asking. What are we looking out for from our creditors? Is it to do a haircut on the interest or the principal?
In negotiations of this nature, I can't sit on TV and tell you some of the things that we are, discussing with them, especially because of, some of the difficulties we've had back home with the domestic debt exchange. But what we are looking to do is to reduce what prior to the program would have been the debt servicing obligation. We are looking to reduce that. And you may do that through a combination of methods. Those are the broad contours or the methods that we are discussing with them. In fact, there's one of the groups that has actually given us a counter offer that we can help you achieve the same end target you are looking for. But we will not take a cut on this particular part. We will rather take it on this part. But I can't sit on TV and give those details. I think the important thing is that the conversations are moving smoothly and we are optimistic. Remember that throughout this program, there was a lot of pessimism that we couldn't do this in that short time. It took us, if I'm counting well, about 10 months to, lock in the SLA. And like you rightly mentioned, if you compare to other countries that even started before us, I think the technical staff at the finance ministry, the team at the finance ministry, the finance minister, and the people leading the delegation have done a very good job. And we should have the confidence in them that they will be able to manage this external credit restructuring pretty well as well.
One other thing that we've all also been worried about is the collateralization or collateralized loans that we've had with China, $619 million between 2007 and 2018. I'll come back to find out how, because we know the consequence in the event that we default. But let me bring in Dr. Etuahene. Doc, my point is, why the delay? From the commercial creditors angle, why do you think that we've not been able to make the kind of progress that we want with the external restructuring, the debt restructuring?
Actually, Dr. Etuahene is not on the line. But
he's again, still not here.
Yes. But
okay, Dr. Etuahene, can you hear me? I hear he's on phone now.
I can hear you.
Sure, please go ahead.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that if you listen to the Honorable Minister, Mr. Kojo Ponkroma, you can hear that, when you're dealing with myriad of creditors, it is not just one person. You have to go through various systems and processes to get it all done. And it is not easy because you're talking about the Chinese. And for the Chinese, which Dr. Bobkin alluded, they hardly do what we call the haircut. They possibly extend the period and reduce the interest as they did for the Zambians. And it takes a lot of time to get all the people involved. So that is why it's affecting the processes. And the processes is not like the domestic where you can say get and people have to buy. This one, they have to assemble their team, do cost-benefit investment profile and analysis, the loss of revenues and all those things before they come out. That's why it takes a little bit longer than the domestic. So the delays are part of the normal thing. This evening, the Bloomberg just told us that Zambia has just almost completed what they started 2021. They just said this evening. So maybe from where the minister is sitting. That's why they always have to clap for themselves, that they think they are running and getting the results. But it's taken quite a long time for the Zambians to get what they needed. So all these processes has affected slowness of the program, and it's going to slow it. It's not going to go easy for us to think that you can say check and you get it. So I'm not even optimistic about the end of the year. Maybe we'll go to the first half of the year, 2024. We'll get these agreements signed. We move to the assurances that we've been getting to the actual agreement and then the signing off, so that the 3 stages will be basically completed by all these external creditors. So that is what I would say for the time being.
Zopon Korma, you wanted to make a point.
I was just making the point about this concept of delay, that once you don't have hard timelines, I think we should be, as we keep saying, delay. Because if it's November and you don't meet it, then there's a delay. But if there's no November for you to meet and you are going along the process, then there's no delay. And then also the second point to make, the specific MOUs for the various classes, yes, I agree. You may sign some next year. But what you need to do is to demonstrate significant progress as you are going through, to give the fund the confidence that the assurances that we're given are being worked towards, so that you can move along the progress. And that's what we are keen to achieve.
So talking about the collateralized loans, $619 million between 2007 and 2018. We know that in the event that we default, China will have access to our bauxite, cocoa oil, and also our electricity sales. And the question has been, how did Parliament allow such agreements to pass? Because this could be dangerous if we default.
Collaterals have always been part of loan agreements, whether it's for private sector or for sovereigns, for a while now. So that in itself is not strange. If you recall the Bui Dam, for example, and many other deals that we have done, there are many loans that we have taken based on collateral. The Bui Dam, I think, was collateralized with part of our cocoa proceeds, etc. Sino-hydro, part of our bauxite, etc. So in itself is not a strange thing. The second thing is that, yes, if you default, technically under a collateral agreement, if you default, then the creditor has access to that particular asset with which you secured that transaction. We do not expect to have a default. That is why we are restructuring. So that if our obligation, for example, was to pay $200 million a year to creditor X, we don't expect to default. That is why, or we don't want to default. That is why we are going through a process of renegotiating to bring down that repayment obligation, for example, to say 100 million, which we can afford. And once we are affording that 100 million, then we are not defaulting. So it is not as though when we restructure, and by the restructuring terms, we are not meeting the old payment threshold, then we have defaulted. No. Once we restructure, the new repayment threshold or the new debt servicing threshold is the one that applies. And then when we are meeting that, we have not defaulted, and therefore we don't run the risk of losing any of our assets. I recall initially, if you look at the ECF, there were some publications that suggested that we have given away our assets as a result of the ECF. But over time, I think we've all realized that those were false narratives that were being pumped into the Ghanaian ecosystem. Yes, we have collateralized loans. Yes, we expect to restructure some of those as part of this external debt restructuring. And yes, when this restructuring is done, it is the new repayment thresholds that will apply so that we don't default.
Well, we pray that we don't default, because we all know
restructuring.
We don't want to get here. But Professor Bokbeng, what's our reality? I mean, it is government's word against some of the credit rating agencies and people like you. What is our reality?
Okay, thank you very much. There's something Honorable Kojo Nkrumah has just said that is a bit comfortable for me.
Okay.
I had heard a view before that, and I haven't seen it anywhere. Maybe I've not read the document well enough. I haven't seen anywhere where it is stated that reaching an agreement with the external creditors is a precondition to we getting the second tranche. So when I saw that statement from the mission chief, I think on my Joy Online or so, I became a bit quiet, because from all my work and insight and all of that, I haven't really, I never came across something like that. And actually, last month I was in UK. I interacted with some of the reps on the official creditor committee. We've had some kind of engagement, and also with the external commercial and all of that. And I've put these things across a couple of times, whether it's really a precondition. And the answer was no. So and again, when you read the agreement, I agree with Honorable Kojo Oppong-Nkrumah, unless there are other things behind the scene that probably is not in the public purview, for which reason this is a precondition. Other than that, it has been my considered view that if you look at the structural benchmark, the indicative target, and the rest of them, in the first review, these are largely low-hanging fruits. And therefore, as a country, we should be able to meet those targets and get the next tranche of the IMF-supported program. But that said, I can understand why now the attention is on the external debt restructuring, because if you look at the program financing arrangement in balance of payment terms, the financing gap, which has to be closed from external debt restructuring relief, is that huge. Okay, annually that translates to about $3.5 billion or so. So what that tells you is that if we don't make progress from there, then it means that there's a lot of risk and headwinds. And for which reason you can see that given that the government is doing its part with fulfilling the internal conditions or benchmarks under the program, we are largely done with the domestic debt restructuring. Of course, in the next 2.5 years or so, per our projections, we are likely to come back to the table. I know Honorable may not agree with me now, but we can leave that for another day because of the way we've done it. If you do the cash flow projection for the country in terms of GDP growth, because we are not growing taxable GDP that much, right? We need to have more of job-rich growth and the rest of them. So the kind of growth we are having, even though it's positive, is not sufficient, right? And that will have implication for really, because it's not every aspect of GDP and its redistribution that is taxable. And that is why,
for example, if you are growing agriculture heavily, it will count as GDP, but you may not necessarily be able to tax it. So yeah, I agree with Prof.
And that is why now we are moving from not only agriculture to agribusiness and agro-processing. We are linking the entire value chain. Then that way you make your GDP a bit more taxable. So that is where we need to focus. And then when we have job-rich growth, decent wage employment, and the rest of them, yes, that is what we should be looking at. Then in that case, we'll not burden the faithful few. So if you do the cash flow projections through to 2027, 2028, you will see that the country may not be in the position when the debt repayment begin to cluster along those lines. But of course, if we see what comes out at the end of the day with the external debt restructuring, then we're able to throw in all the numbers and we'll have some certainty in terms of where we are in terms of debt sustainability. So that is where we are. So I also think, and I support Honorable Kojo Oppong-Nkrumah's statement that we getting the next tranche of the IMF supported program, the 600 million, I think that is largely controllable. Okay, and therefore, because I haven't seen anywhere that is actually tied to we signing an agreement. Okay, and as it has been indicated, remember, these countries that are represented on the official creditor committee are also acting on behalf of their taxpayers, right? So they also need to report back and all of that. So certainly we should anticipate back and forth and rest of them. Of course, as we have all been told, there are not clear timelines. The G20 framework itself is also evolving and all of that. So yes, of course, we can also say delay because reasonability would also come into play here. Of course, in the case of Zambia, elections, change of government and all of that also played a role. At some point, they focused a bit more on Zambia, trying to close the deal on that. My understanding is that the official creditor committee will now focus a bit more attention also on Ghana. Remember, in all of this, Ghana is the preferred child of the IMF, right? Ghana and IMF is like marriage made for each other. Okay, so certainly the IMF managing director also has that extra interest in ensuring that Ghana is able to scale the wall.
All right, I have just 1 minute, and let me give that to Dr. Chwahine briefly. Doc, Professor Bokbin made a point, a very valid point about how careful we should be so that these creditors do not weaponize the debt relief. I mean, how careful enough can we be so we don't get into their trap? Briefly.
Thank you very much, Aisha. I think Professor Bobkin made a very, very important point the gap, the BOP gap. And if the IMF is going to provide you about 5 billion, I think 4 point something billion, what are we going to do? We need about 15. How are we going to solve the differences of that? So it goes on to support that we should target areas where we can grow the economy. I mean, we should grow the economy through diversifying and to reduce our dependency on these foreign exchange that is draining the country. If we do that, the DOP itself may address itself. And again, what I'll urge the minister, and it's a good opportunity to get him now. Kojo, Honorable Kojo, I think you should go back and look at Botswana renegotiating of minerals, the DBS agreement. I've done a work, Mr. Honorable, I've done a work. Last year, I think one of your ministers quoted that we got 6.6 billion for gold. Honorable, it is only 862 million, which was captured in the balance of payment. So I was wondering, where is this 5.6? I know investors come in. So that is why I'm advising you that you get a team, and we have a creme de la creme people here, to begin to negotiate with some of the minerals who are taking, you mine 6.6, and you take 6.3. That is why you hear that Ghana is a investor-friendly country, because they are exploiting us. I think DBS, Anglo DBS in Botswana, was doing a similar thing. This year, they have changed the strategy that do it or leave it, go to 30% up to 40%.
And I'm sure Mr. Oponkroma has taken some notes from Dr. Echuahene, but unfortunately, that's how time will allow us. I'm grateful, gentlemen, for your time. Professor Bokmain, Dr. Echuahene, and Kojo Oponkroma. Thank you so much. My name is Aisha Ibrahim. Do enjoy the rest of our programs.